Hi, everyone. So good to see all of you here. I just want to take the first part of this to get to know a little bit about each of you. So if you could tell me your name, where you're from, a little bit about your interest in Montessori, and maybe about your experiences with online learning, that'd be awesome. So I'll go last. The aim of this presentation is, first of all, let me say that I'm relatively new to distance learning as well. I have taught college coursework online, but college students are very different from elementary and high school students. So teaching high school online is an entirely new experience for me, and I'm learning as I'm going. So this is just what I found to be effective so far. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what Montessori is, especially with older students, because I'm working with high school. And I'm going to give you some tools that you can use in your own lives, in application with your own children or even with your colleagues. And then I want you to interrupt me as much as you want. If you have any questions, just please jump in. We're going to try to stop a couple of times for conversation. And let's get started. So first of all, my experience in Montessori is strange because I work in the first public Montessori high school in the United States of America. We are a strange kind of school because high school was not Montessori's focus. She was really into talking about little children. So we're adapting her philosophy for teenagers, and it's sort of a learn-as-you-go experience, but it's also really exciting. And we're seeing a lot of really wonderful outcomes among our student population. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. My kids are 60% African-American, 40% white. Which is unusual also for an American school in the Midwest. And about a third of our students live at or below poverty. So we have different resources that the kids come to school with, and we try to share. We're very egalitarian and democratic in our student makeup, and I love working at this school because of that. I've been teaching for 15 years, 6th grade through college. Pretty much anything that people threw at me, I taught and tried my best, except for math. That's never going to happen. Okay. So this is just a very brief overview of some of the things I'm going to touch on. Maria Montessori, I know some of you said you admire her and know a little bit about her life. She was trained as a doctor, so a lot of her approaches have to do with a scientific understanding of childhood development, and in my particular case, teenage development. So we're going to talk a little bit about developmental phases and needs of students at certain times in their lives. So let's just get into it. Okay. The first thing you need to know is if you are teaching at home, if you're one of the parents who are trying to do distance learning right now, I see you all over social media. I know it's not easy. You are not at school. Do not try to be at school. Do not try to keep to that schedule. Don't make yourself crazy. Just figure out what works for your family, and learn as you go, because that's what all of us are doing. So don't be hard on yourself. Everybody's figuring this out. Montessori. So to be a teacher in a Montessori classroom means you have to have an incredible amount of humility, because the whole idea is to make you marginalized, to put you in the corner and put the students in a place of power. So it's all about giving up power and setting up the students for success and for agency. So this is wonderful when you think about distance learning, right? Because you're literally no longer in the room, and you're supposed to be as far away as possible after the student has been enabled to succeed. So I'm going to talk about that framework, and in the end, it should be a comforting thing, because it's no longer all about you trying to make something happen. It's about setting someone else up for success and then just being there as a support system, which works really well with online learning, actually. Okay, last little bit that's kind of important to think about. Maria Montessori said in one of her books that she published, the child who has never learned to work by himself, to set his own goals, set goals for his own acts, or to be the master of his own force of will, is recognizable in the adult who lets others guide his will and feels the constant need for approval of others. So the system is all about, Montessori pedagogy is about enabling a child, and I think a teenager, to feel completely confident with his or her decisions, to be peaceful in failure, because we all fail sometimes, and to move on from there and use it as a learning experience. So I have a lot of respect for the Montessori tradition. It is new for me. I've only been doing it for 3 years. I come from a traditional background, and I see a huge change in the students who are Montessori educated. It's really beautiful. Okay, so here's what you want to do. If you're teaching from home or you're working on online learning, for yourself or for anybody else, you need 2 things first. And this is really clear in Montessori education. You have to have a prepared workspace, so there has to be a place where you are comfortable. Now for kids, this could be the floor. This doesn't mean you have to sit and share with the light and the pencil sharpener and everything. You may need a pillow to sit on the floor. You may need to be on the porch. You just have to find a place that feels conducive to your comfort. And then you set up there, and that's your spot. So finding that spot's important. And then you have to actually keep your space clean. This is a real challenge with children. Those of you who are parents, I realize I'm asking for the moon here. But Montessori education actually talks about respect for the environment, not just the natural world, but your possessions, kind of a gratitude of ownership and trying to keep your space clear. So obviously there will be mess. We're all locked in for a while, but try to find one space that is going to be clear, or find one time in the morning where you're going to clean. Because our students in our classroom, they do that every day. We have restoration at the end of the day where the students water plants and they clean up their environment, and they realize that it's part of their identity, conducive to their work. So yeah, I understand this is not easy. So we're going to look at something called following the child, and then I'm going to pause for questions because I'm throwing a lot at you, and I realize that. Maria Montessori talks a lot about following the child, and what she means is that adults tend to think we know what's best for someone else because we've been a child, so therefore we must have everything nailed down. We know it. Not true. So in following the child, you sort of look at that child's individual needs, individual interests, and you try to meet the child where he or she is. So developmental needs are certainly part of that, but also creating choices, and even in some cases, the illusion of choice. So you have to do these things for school, but there's a way to deliver that to the students so that it feels like the student's in control of all this work that has to be done. And then finally, every child has a natural instinct to do something. You'll have those kids who sit and fiddle and like move and they can't hold still, and kids who will draw on everything no matter what it is, and children who will stare at the ceiling and just join a different universe for a while you're talking. So those kids, those are not weaknesses. Those are differences in a child's personality. And instead of seeing them as weaknesses, it's really useful to tap into them and say, okay, you don't feel like sitting? Go take a walk. Go take a walk and come back. Or you need to draw? Here's some really beautiful paper. Don't draw now, but you can draw in an hour. You know what I mean? So we'll get there. Okay, first of all, sleep. I have parents who are trying to make their teens get out of bed at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's not going to happen. Don't drive yourself crazy. Just let them sleep. They're going to need it. And then when they're up, kind of set a little bit of a schedule for the day. Maria Montessori sort of broke down developmental stages into 4 periods of life. And each one of these periods has a very different purpose. In maturity, she kind of gives up and leaves that alone. But her focus is on the first 2 stages, and then mine is on adolescence. And in each of these, it has a different focus. So if you're working with little kids, it's reasoning, it's asking questions. They're in a constant state of soaking up information and mirroring that back to you and beginning to ask their own questions. For an adolescent, it's about pushing the boundaries and connecting. It's about socializing. So putting an adolescent in isolation is one of the hardest things that I can imagine doing as a parent. Little kids, you can sort of give them chalk and send them to the sidewalk and things are going to be okay eventually. Teenagers, it's rough. You can't get them off their phones. So she also recognizes that there are planes of development. That there are sort of ebbs and flows to the planes of development. So progression means you're going forward, regression backwards in terms of your behavior, your ability to learn, your openness to listening to other people. And she recognizes that each of these planes sort of goes back and forth. Kids are sometimes making progress, and other times they're not gonna. And nothing you do is going to work, and that's okay because it's normal. So there's sort of a embracing of chaos a little bit in Montessori, but it's very realistic, and I appreciate it. Okay, 2 last things I want to hit, and then we're going to pause. So especially in the high school classroom, but also in younger grades, checklists are extremely important. I don't know how many of you do this in your daily lives, but to create a checklist that breaks down the students' classwork for the week is important, because then everything is on one page. It's less scary because it's contained. And then the student can sort of choose where to begin and plan out that week. So printing out just a blank checklist at the beginning of the week and allowing someone to go through and fill out what needs to be done is an empowering thing for a student, and easier than looking at a planner or anything else. Just one page, very simple. I think it's also important to include other things aside from study on here. So if you have a student who's a musician and loves to play guitar, but they're stuck, sitting and doing their math work, put guitar on the checklist and say, sometime this week, this is what you have to do. And then when that student sits down, it's not like you're avoiding work. You're doing part of what you should be doing that week. And it sort of condones a student doing what he or she loves, which is a psychological trick, but it works. So I have a lot of these in different versions for different age groups. And if anyone needs them for their children, I would be happy to share that. After the presentation is over, I can give you my email and you can go ahead and I can give all of this to you. I have a lot. And then finally, the natural interest. And I know a lot of parents and a lot of bosses, a lot of people in charge of, or not in charge of, but in charge of nurturing others are already interested in who their children or their workers are as people. And that's really the sign of a good boss, right? Or the sign of a good parent, is that you see that person for who he or she is and you nurture that development. So you really do want to take time to say, if you're an artist, here's paper, here are paints. If you're an athlete, go outside and jog, wear a mask. But you really want to do that. That is just as important, if not more, than any schoolwork your kid is being given right now. And Montessori education really acknowledges that, because what's natural in a child is precious, and Montessori would even argue sacred. And I love that about her. I think more of us should feel that way about our kids, right? Or our workers. So I'm going to go ahead and take a pause. We're going to get to this in a second, but I'd like to open the floor up for questions or thoughts or anything you have. So I have 2 answers for that. The first is, for some students, procrastination is part of the creative process. And for years, teachers have been saying, don't procrastinate, do it first, sit down, be structured. Not every child works that way. So as long as the work gets done, sometimes procrastination and that pressure that it brings is part of the process. And we just have to kind of understand that it's going to happen with some kids. But the checklist, the other way that it can sort of push past procrastination aside to a certain extent is it will say, all right, you don't want to do this right now? That's fine. Pick something off the list. You've got 20 things, pick one. If you don't want to do that last thing and you put it off, that's fine, but you've also accomplished something else. So it works for me, and I'm a pretty good procrastinator, actually.
So you're writing your own list?
Yeah, I write a list. I've actually started doing this since I started working in a Montessori school, and I find that I get much more done. So I never could keep a planner, but a checklist for some reason works. I will admit to you that my first year of teaching, I worked in a private school. Traditional, very high tuition for overachievers, and I worked there for several years. So it was structured like that. I'm the expert, I have the master's degree in this, and therefore sit there and absorb my greatness. Working in a Montessori school was a lot about humility for me the first year, because the kids were not interested sometimes in what I had to say. And instead of blaming them, I had to stop and think, why aren't they interested? there's a lot of value to remembering how little you actually know. And as a teacher, you fail just as much as you succeed. And all of those experiences are valuable and you learn from them. So I think when it comes to parents, you love your kid, you have very strong desires for what you want for that child in life. And all of those things are good and wonderful. But your child may not be the person that you were expecting. Your child might be different. And if that is the case, you've got to love that child anyway. And I'm sure I'm speaking to a lot of people who feel that way. It's just about remembering that we're all on a journey together and that I don't know so much. I walk into the library and I know a fraction of what's there. And sometimes my children teach me things that I never would have imagined. So being open and being respectful towards kids as people instead of receptacles, it creates a bond in the classroom that I really love. And I regret that I didn't have that earlier, because they really do want now to sit and talk to me and know my opinion as long as I want to know theirs. And I think to even add to that, every child is sort of a genius in his or her own way. There's always something that kid is better at than everybody else in the room. And the secret is just finding it, because a standardized test is not going to look for those things. And then you've got brilliant kids walking around feeling like they're stupid because they didn't get the score they were supposed to get, on some kind of test. Absolutely. No, confidence goes a long way. And to build on your point about adults and older people, we often feel like, well, after you're 18, if you haven't accomplished the universe, then it's over. Or, adults can't learn this or that. It's ridiculous, because the more that we study about the adult learner, the more that we find that brain is very elastic, and a great deal can be accomplished by older learners. So it's important to keep that in mind, because the world is just too quick to make limitations on others. Absolutely. I think there's a great deal of emphasis on that, and I think there's also a great deal of emphasis on application. So a lot of the reason why students don't do well in a subject is they can't see why it matters. And that was me with mathematics, and I regret that, and I'm sure a lot of us do. But we take students out into the world, and actually the World Wide Web is not a bad replacement in our particular circumstance. So I was supposed to be in New York City last week with 33 high school students. We were going to be studying culture and diversity in New York City, and clearly that did not work out. But we would take art, we would take history lessons, and then we would put them into reality. And when the students would go back to the classroom, they would see a reason for why they were studying that. Or it would be an economics course that would be played out with a student walking into the stock exchange on Wall Street and learning about what happens when you apply that kind of mathematics. So Montessori is really great at addressing that. Okay, I'm talking too much and for too long, so I'm going to jump in and try to get through the rest of this a little bit more quickly. And then I like to talk a little bit more, because I'd love to hear your experiences. And we're from so many different countries and different backgrounds. I want to learn from you a little bit today too. So in Montessori education, you have to remember that you're not just educating a brain. It's really easy to forget that, especially in Western education. We think only about the IQ, whatever measurement we're giving the children, whatever test we've just, inflicted upon them. So food. You're at home. You have hopefully food. If you do not, then you can talk to me at the end of this, because I have a lot of resources for families who are struggling with that. But you can go ahead and get into the kitchen with your child or with whoever you're holed up with, and cook and learn about nutrition and post recipes and make it into something social. I've got a bunch of high school students who are making complete messes out of their parents' kitchens right now because they formed a cupcake club. And they're learning about chemistry. They're learning about measurements. They're learning about why you shouldn't eat too much sugar. It's useful. And then exercise, which is very closely linked to that, is also important when we're all holed up. So to remember to let that child go outside, take a walk. Nature, Montessori is really focused on the environment, which is extremely important today in an era of global warming and a concern about mass extinction. So we really want to nurture in a child a reverence for nature, a respect for it. So planting a garden, growing your own food. We take kids camping, we make them go to farms and to see what farmers are doing and where their food comes from and why they should respect it. So it's important. And finally, mindfulness. And I don't know about you, but I am the worst meditator on the planet. I'm so bad at it. And I don't necessarily force my students into that because I know I'm awful. But mindfulness is not just about sitting and being still. It's also about just being present in an activity. So I keep bringing up art because I love to draw. So putting a student in, or even yourself, into a place where you can just create and you sort of, the world melts away, that is really important for your health and for your well-being and for your sense of joy in living on this planet. So you have to find those moments and make them for yourself to just be in something that you love and feel that flow. Students need it as much as adults do, or kids need it as much as adults do. You may be students. Okay. A sense of ownership is also a really strong piece of a Montessori education. And it's really important with teenagers because a lot of times a mark of maturity is you're no longer blaming other people. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not whatever's fault. It's okay, I made this decision and it was a bad one and now I'm going to learn and move on from there. And that will happen at home just as much as it will anywhere else. So a self-reflection sometime during the week, even over the dinner table. How did this week go? What was hard? What went well? Let's recognize that. And then acknowledgements are really, I don't know why they're just really in Montessori education. I feel like they should be everywhere because it's just a moment to say, thank you for doing this for me. So Ingo, I acknowledge you for letting me talk to my computer for an hour and all these beautiful people. It's wonderful. It gave me a sense of sitting down and planning for my students. And now I'm actually going to use some of what I researched in my teaching next week. So I acknowledge Ingo. Thank you. It works. Okay. Oh, I see I have a chat. Okay. How does the philosophy of intersectionalism square with taking personal responsibility? Is that an issue for you in 2020? I would say with my students, there is an understanding, at least I think I mentioned 60% are African American from an urban setting, and a lot of them are living in poverty. Mm-hmm. So, and then we have other kids whose parents drive Mercedes into the parking lot. Mm-hmm. So there is a very deep understanding of a divide economically there in our school. And for that reason, when we travel, say when we go to New York, the students who can provide scholarship money to the other students do so anonymously. Mm-hmm. And so we do have sort of a socialism set up into our setting there that enables all of the students to participate and to get grants and scholarships when they need it. So that's sort of a sidebar. When it comes to taking responsibility, I think that it's not just the individual that needs to do that, it's also our society. And our Midwestern city that is bordered on the South that used to be a slave state is just right across the river, right? So our African American population knows that they were segregated and treated horrifically for generations. And so where they live and how much money they make and the education and level of their grandparents and parents is very much influenced by that. And that's not something we shy away from in the classroom. Conversely, we also emphasize personal responsibility and community. So our kids, even though they may be coming from poverty, know that they are not less valued than anybody in that classroom, and they are not less capable than anyone else in the classroom. And we just have to make sure that they have the support systems in place. And the teachers do that by staying after school, by making sure all the kids have internet connection at home. We make sure every child has a computer. So I live in a little bit of a utopia, and I acknowledge that. I wish every school worked like this, but yeah, there's a balance. You are absolutely right. So there are several different approaches in Montessori philosophy that I think are very strong. One of them that I love is we talk about social justice. So Ingo knows that in my personal life, I'm a very strong volunteer for some social justice movements. And one of them has to do with Rwanda, actually, and with what happened in the years after the war. There's a man named Carl Wilkins who works there. He was the only American who stayed in Rwanda during the genocide. And he works with teachers now to talk about how that country healed from that horrible conflict. And they talk about social justice and talking about making peace when there's pain and taking responsibility for what you've done. Now, that's an extreme. That's nowhere near anything that happens in my classroom. But the concept of being hurt and carrying that hurt and not doing anything with it or refusing responsibility is very much alive in a classroom. So we have a graphic that actually sits on the floor. And there are different pieces of the pie. And one of them will say, how did this make you feel? And in that moment, when you're standing on that piece, that's all you talk about. How did this make you feel? What are the facts of what happened? And you stand there and you talk about just the facts. What hurt you? What was it? And then what do you want from a conversation with the person who hurt you? So what we would do is we would take the 2 students or 3 students involved in whatever altercation happened in the lunchroom, and we would put them around the circle and we would have them walk the circle and talk out their ideas. And then we'd have them sit and reflect, and we would take however many lunches we needed to talk it out. And the number of fights that have happened in our school have dropped astronomically since we started doing this, because they just have a chance to talk it through, and they realize most of the time there's an understanding that has just been missed. It causes a lot of maturation in the students, which is a really beautiful thing to see. I think like a Montessori teacher, I go in 30 different directions. So I hope
I love the idea with the wheel and kind of walking around, and with that really drawing or helping the student to think about themselves and their own reactions. And as you said, like separating fact from interpretation and emotional reaction, which we tend to mix even as adults when we're not educated in this. So it's actually beautiful that you teach children this at such a young age.
Yeah, it works with adults too. You'd be surprised.
I know, but I also know that a lot of people haven't been taught this. So there's always the emotionally interpreted view of reality that we take as reality. So, oh, she or he hurt me, right? It's like, well, there's the fact of what happened, and then there's the interpretation. And maybe the person didn't mean it that way, but it made you feel that way. And because you felt that way, you assume that the other person had that intention, although sometimes that's not the case.
Exactly. Well, it isolates facts, and it also breaks down polarization. And right now, unfortunately, the model for most of these children is polarized, because every time you turn on the news, one group hates the other and nobody can come together. And so the kids see that as a model for how to deal with their differences, and we have to break that down. So 2 more things to look at in this discussion. Then, like I said, I really want to open it up for everybody. I'm going to breeze through this quick. Okay, these are photographs from my neighborhood. So everyone is social distancing and quarantine. We had a neighbor hide Easter eggs around the streets for kids to find, and when they find them, they can tick it off on a chart. We've had sidewalk art. We've had people putting out bowls for dogs, and it's been really sweet to see how people have kind of tried to come together from a distance. A lot of creativity is born of it. When you talk about community and Montessori sense, and especially in terms of social distancing, whoever you're stuck with at home, here's a new opportunity to get to know them on a different level, right? So if you have siblings at home and you're all learning, allow that learning to happen together to the extent that it can. Allow a sibling to help a younger student learn, or allow learning to take place tangentially so that they can interact with one another. That happens in the Montessori classroom, and it's really wonderful because the adult is no longer the person that you go to. Now it's your community of peers, strengthens friendships, all of that. For school, hopefully all of this is still connected. through Zoom, through Google Classroom, through Google Meet, whatever you're using. So to make sure that you check in with that community is very important. And also looking at your city or your town. So any of these are points of connection. Any of these are opportunities to find connections with other people. And also, how wonderful is this, right? I can't imagine being stuck in quarantine before the internet. What would we do, right? Now we have everyone. We can reach anybody. I just talked to a friend in Belgium yesterday. It was marvelous. So a lot of students don't have pen pals. We don't do that anymore. But this is such a wonderful time to actually set that up. And there are programs all over the internet for that. Or even frankly, adults. I would like pen pal. Great. So these are just ideas I wanted to throw out there for connecting. A lot of these I think are obvious, ones that you've already seen on social media, but we're getting creative. You know, the Italians are standing on their balconies singing to one another, and New Yorkers are clapping at 7 p.m. to show appreciation for their healthcare workers. And these are such little things, but they create hugely important bonds in a time when we feel isolated. So anything you can encourage in your homes, I think, is going to be very useful. And healing. I just wanted, for those of you who are parents and who are working with children, the United Nations Children's Agency put out a warning. This is from April 9th, but they put it out, I think, a couple days earlier than that, saying that online predators have spiked through the roof because they know there are so many more children online. So just be very aware of that. Zoom is actually kind of dangerous for kids because people can hack. We're okay, but for little guys, I'd watch out. And also TikTok apparently is a really scary app for online predators. So just look into that. If your child has anything like that, watch out. I'm sure I didn't need to tell you that, but it just is a reminder. And then finally, I'm going to end on this. I think service is a really wildly important thing in this time because we know there are so many needs out there. People don't have work. You know, healthcare workers need masks and gloves and frankly, just a dose of appreciation for all the risks they're taking, not to mention like, grocery store clerks and mailmen and the Amazon person here, and it's very important. So we want to make sure that we're looking for those needs and trying to fill them where we can. And I think setting that example for a child is just invaluable because it'll be something that they carry out of this pandemic into the rest of their lives if we do it right. So that's a really strong, there are a lot of really cool things online too. There's an app for people who are blind, and you can connect with the app and then guide someone who's blind. They turn on the camera on their phone. You can guide them to whatever they need. It's called Be My Eyes. It's just a really beautiful app, and you can do something from a distance for someone so far away. It's marvelous. Okay, and then finally, think about with whoever you're learning with, what are you going to do when this is over? Everybody needs hope. And I think when we don't know where the end of this is, that's a really hard thing. So just allow your kids to make a plan, have a big party when it's all over, and put that plan up somewhere in the house so that you know that when this is over, here's what we're going to do. Hope is a really important factor in getting through anything that's difficult. And the classroom is no different, even if it's online. Okay, I'm not going to speak this out loud, but I would like to talk. So in the time that we have left, what questions do you have? What thoughts do you have? How are you thinking of applying any of this? How can I help you further?
We have a question in the chat from Anna who asks, what are your recommendations of current online resources, games for children 5 to 7 years old or years of age?
So 5 to 7 is not the age that I teach, but I have 3 godchildren who are 5 to 7. So what I can do is take your information and get back with you, and I can give you a lot of different places to look, okay? Oh, agreeing to do webinars. I have a due date, it must be done. I work with a lot of really gifted, amazing colleagues, and we have coffee chats or wine chats where we'll meet a couple times a week and we'll go through the work that we've done with one another. I am a social creature, And this being alone is driving me crazy. So it helps me a lot to be with someone else and to share ideas. So that accountability is useful for me. The other thing is I set myself a goal at the end of the week. I put it on a calendar, and every morning I wake up and I look at it, and for some reason just seeing it helps. I don't know if I'm simple, but it works for me. So, and I think scheduling joy into my calendar is really important for me, because I will work myself into the ground if I don't do that. So if I say, all right, this day I'm stopping everything at 6 o'clock and I'm scheduling a break and I'm going to draw, or I'm going to meet my friends online, that helps me refresh for later, and then I'm a better worker. So ironically, if you want to work well and hold yourself accountable, take breaks. Don't be so hard on yourself.